Chapter 3: Creation, Labor, and the Purpose of Humanity. As Mesopotamian civilization matured, theological reflection deepened. By the late 3rd and early 2nd millennium BCE, myths began to address a profound question: why do human beings exist? This question was not approached in abstract philosophical terms. It was framed within the practical realities of temple economy, agriculture, and labor. In a society sustained by coordinated work, the concept of purpose was inseparable from service. The most detailed Mesopotamian accounts of human origins appear in Akkadian texts from the early 2nd millennium BCE, though they preserve much older Sumerian traditions. Among these narratives, the Atrahasis epic offers one of the clearest portrayals of the Anunnaki within the context of creation. The story begins not with humanity, but with the gods themselves. In the beginning, according to the epic, the world was inhabited only by divine beings. Yet even gods were not equal. There existed a hierarchy within the divine realm. The great gods, often identified with the Anunnaki, occupied positions of authority. Beneath them were lesser deities, sometimes called the Igigi. These lower gods were assigned labor. They dug canals. They cleared riverbeds. They maintained the infrastructure necessary for sustaining order in the world. Their work mirrored that of human agricultural laborers. Over time, the Igigi grew weary. The epic describes their exhaustion and frustration. They rebelled against their imposed labor, surrounding the dwelling of Enlil in protest. The narrative presents a divine crisis. Authority was challenged. Order was threatened. The Anunnaki convened in council. This assembly is described with deliberation. The gods did not act impulsively. They debated solutions. Enlil initially responded with anger, but wisdom emerged from another source. Enki, associated with intelligence and craft, proposed an alternative. Rather than forcing the lesser gods to continue their labor, Enki suggested creating a new being. Humanity would assume the burden of work. Through this act, divine stability would be restored. The goddess Nintu, sometimes identified with birth and creation, was tasked with shaping humanity. According to the epic, she mixed clay with the blood of a slain god. From this mixture, human beings were formed. The symbolism is layered. Clay represents the earth, abundant in Mesopotamia. Divine blood signifies connection to the gods. Humans were neither purely mortal nor fully divine. They were intermediaries, designed for function. The newly created humans took up agricultural labor. They dug canals and cultivated fields. They provided offerings to the temples. The burden of maintaining order shifted from the lesser gods to humanity. Within this myth, the Anunnaki play a decisive role. They are not peripheral observers. They are participants in the decision to create humankind. The narrative emphasizes collective deliberation. Fate is determined through council. The purpose of humanity in this framework is service. This concept must be understood within its historical context. Mesopotamian cities depended on coordinated labor. Irrigation required maintenance. Harvests required storage and redistribution. Temple complexes functioned as administrative centers. The myth reflects the social reality of structured work. Over time, however, the story complicates. As generations passed, humanity multiplied. The epic describes increasing noise disturbing the gods. Enlil, irritated by human clamor, sought to reduce their numbers. Plagues and drought were sent. Yet Enki, sympathetic to humanity, warned a righteous man named Atrahasis, enabling survival. Eventually, a great flood was decreed. Here again, the Anunnaki are portrayed as participants in cosmic judgment. The decision to flood the earth is presented as a collective act. Yet divine disagreement persists. Enki covertly instructs Atrahasis to build a vessel preserving life. After the flood subsides, the gods gather once more. The Anunnaki witness the devastation. They regret the loss of offerings, for humanity had provided sustenance to the divine realm. The narrative reveals interdependence. Though humans were created to serve the gods relied upon human devotion. In the aftermath, new measures are established. Mortality is limited. Human lifespan is curtailed. Fertility controls are introduced through priestesses and social customs. Balance is restored. These creation and flood narratives circulated widely. Variations appear in the Epic of Gilgamesh and in later Babylonian texts. The Anunnaki consistently appear as great gods whose collective authority shapes destiny. The theological implications are significant. First, humanity is not accidental. It is intentionally crafted for a defined role. Second, divine power is not monolithic. Debate and disagreement exist within the assembly. Third, balance between gods and humans must be maintained. The Anunnaki embody this structured authority. They are associated with decree, fate, and cosmic administration. It is important to distinguish these ancient texts from modern reinterpretations. The cuneiform tablets discovered in the 19th century contain no references to advanced technology or extraterrestrial origins. They describe gods in anthropomorphic terms, embedded within agricultural society. The clay tablets themselves provide physical evidence of continuity. Excavations at sites such as Nineveh and Sippar revealed libraries preserving these myths. The scribes who copied them did so carefully, preserving formulaic language and ritual expressions. In temple rituals, hymns were recited that acknowledged the authority of the great gods. Offerings of bread, beer, and incense symbolized reciprocal relationship. The Anunnaki were invoked not as distant abstractions, but as present powers shaping harvest and health. The flood narrative would later resonate beyond Mesopotamia. Elements appear in Hebrew scripture and other Near Eastern traditions. Yet within the Mesopotamian context, it is part of a broader theological framework centered on order and labor. The Anunnaki were not creators in isolation. They were council members responding to crisis. As the old Babylonian period advanced under rulers such as Hammurabi, religious thought continued to evolve. Marduk, patron of Babylon, would rise in prominence. Yet even in new imperial myths, the structure of divine assembly persisted. The Enuma Elish, composed in the early first millennium BCE, describes a cosmic battle culminating in Marduk's supremacy. In this text, the Anunnaki acknowledge his authority. They build his temple and proclaim his kingship. Their role adapts, but does not disappear. Thus, across centuries, from Sumerian city-states to Babylonian empire, the concept of the Anunnaki remained linked to governance of the cosmos. Human beings tilled fields and recited prayers. Kings issued decrees invoking divine sanction. Scribes copied myths that explained why labor existed at all. In these narratives, the Anunnaki stand at the intersection of theology and society. They deliberate, they decree, they judge. And humanity, shaped from clay and divine essence, continues its work beneath their watchful presence. Chapter 4: Kingship, Law, and Divine Authority. By the early 2nd millennium BCE, Mesopotamia had entered a new political era. The independent Sumerian city-states of earlier centuries had given way to larger territorial kingdoms. Power consolidated under dynasties that ruled not merely one city, but entire regions. Yet even as political structures changed, religious foundations endured. Kingship was never presented as purely human achievement. It was understood as a gift from the gods. In Sumerian tradition, the Sumerian king list provides a revealing perspective. This text, preserved in multiple copies, begins with a statement both simple and profound. Kingship descended from heaven. Authority did not originate on earth. It was bestowed. The king list moves chronologically from mythical antediluvian rulers to historical dynasties. Though its early sections contain legendary lifespans stretching thousands of years, its later portions align more closely with archaeological evidence. What remains constant is the theological framing. Political order reflects divine will. Within this worldview, the Anunnaki occupied a structural role. As members of the divine assembly, they represented the ultimate source of legitimacy. Kings ruled at their pleasure. Royal inscriptions from the city of describe rulers presenting themselves as chosen by Nana, the moon god, yet always within the broader pantheon. In Nippur, kings sought recognition from Enlil. Without Enlil's sanction, no reign was secure. The divine council functioned as a cosmic mirror of earthly governance. Just as kings relied on advisors and elders, the chief gods were portrayed as deliberating among themselves. The Anunnaki, often identified as high-ranking deities within that council, participated in decisions concerning destiny and authority. During the Old Babylonian period, which began around 1900 BCE, this theological structure found new expression. The Amorite dynasty that established Babylon as a major power adopted existing religious traditions while elevating its own patron deity, Marduk. Under King Hammurabi, who ruled from approximately 1792 to 1750 BCE, Babylon rose to regional dominance. Hammurabi is best remembered for his law code, inscribed on a basalt stele and set in a public place. The prologue of the Code of Hammurabi is revealing. It does not begin with human reasoning. It begins with divine mandate. Hammurabi describes how the gods Anu and Enlil called Marduk to supreme power. Marduk then selected Hammurabi to establish justice. This chain of authority traces upward through the divine assembly. Law originates in heaven. The king enforces it on earth. Though the code does not frequently mention the Anunnaki by name, their presence is implied within the broader theological system. They form part of the great gods whose collective will sustains order. The concept of justice in Mesopotamia was not abstract equality. It was balance. Widows and orphans were to be protected. Contracts were to be honored. Property disputes were to be resolved through legal procedure. The king's role was to prevent chaos. Chaos in Mesopotamian imagination was not only political disorder. It was cosmic imbalance. Flood and famine could be interpreted as signs of divine displeasure. Thus, legal and ritual responsibilities were intertwined. Temple complexes continued to serve as administrative hubs. Priests recorded transactions, supervised land holdings, and conducted rituals. Offerings maintained divine favor. The gods, including the Anunnaki, were understood to sustain prosperity when properly honored. In several Akkadian hymns, the Anunnaki are described as judges of humanity. This judicial imagery parallels the increasing formalization of legal systems. Just as human courts deliberated cases, so too did the divine assembly determine fate. The underworld also became more clearly defined during this period. In some traditions, the Anunnaki were associated with the realm of the dead. They were described as seated in judgment beneath the earth. This association reflects theological development rather than abrupt change. The underworld, known as Irkalla, was ruled by Ereshkigal. Yet certain texts describe the Anunnaki as her advisors, or as chthonic powers within that domain. Their authority extended beyond heaven. Political upheaval did not diminish religious continuity. After Hammurabi's dynasty weakened, power shifted to the Kassites in Babylon and to other regional states. Each new regime maintained reverence for the ancient pantheon. The Kassite rulers, who governed Babylon for several centuries beginning in the 16th century BCE, preserved the worship of Marduk, while also honoring Enlil and other traditional gods. Inscriptions continue to invoke the great gods collectively. Throughout these transitions, the image of divine counsel persisted. Kings issued proclamations claiming they acted in accordance with decrees of the gods. Military victories were attributed to divine favor. One notable aspect of Mesopotamian religion is its adaptability. Deities could merge or acquire new attributes. Local gods gained prominence when cities rose in power. Yet the structure of divine assembly remained recognizable. The Anunnaki, whether emphasized or mentioned briefly, continued to symbolize high-ranking divine authority. It is during the Late Bronze Age that international diplomacy flourished across the Near East. Letters exchanged between rulers of Egypt, Hatti, Mitanni, and Babylon often invoked divine witnesses. Treaties were sworn before the gods. In such treaties, the gods functioned as guarantors. Breaking an agreement invited divine punishment. The Anunnaki, as part of the greater pantheon, were implicit within this network of sacred accountability. The intertwining of law and theology shaped daily life. Contracts for marriage, land sale, or debt repayment were inscribed on clay tablets. Oaths invoked divine names. To swear falsely was to risk supernatural consequence. The concept of destiny also became formalized. The tablets of destiny appear in certain myths as objects symbolizing ultimate authority over cosmic order. While not exclusively tied to the Anunnaki, these motifs reinforce the idea that fate is administered within divine hierarchy. The development of kingship in Mesopotamia reveals a society seeking stability amid change. Empires rose and fell. Borders shifted. Yet beneath political transformation lay a shared understanding. Authority flows from the divine. The Anunnaki, as members of the celestial assembly, were woven into this understanding. They were not distant philosophical abstractions. They were invoked in ritual, referenced in myth, and implied in royal ideology. As we move forward chronologically, the balance of power among the gods will shift again. New empires will reinterpret older traditions. Yet the foundational link between kingship, law, and divine authority will endure. In the land between the rivers, governance was never merely administrative. It was sacred. And in that sacred structure, the Anunnaki remained guardians of order, seated within the council that shaped the destiny of kings and commoners alike. Write your questions in the comments. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for upcoming episodes of the documentary series. New documentaries are released every Wednesday and Friday on this channel.